Time of the year, many people go through what's called the seasonal blues. So it's when you're overcome by an overwhelming feeling of loneliness and sometimes inadequacy. And during this time, many of us take a moment to think about the year that was. We tally up the achievements and goals. For some people, it might be an exercise filled with disappointment. Let's talk to clinical psychologist Dr Khosi Jiyane on how we can navigate the highs and the lows of this festive season. It is a very real thing, and I know that we do this often towards the end of the year or the advent of a big holiday where families are involved. But specifically now, it's like this big audit that happens of the year that's been. And one of a really good friend of mine, Khosi, posted a thing saying, you know, a lot of people will be celebrating all their achievements this year, and some of us will just be celebrating the fact that we survived the year. So talk to us about, you know, the spectrum of feelings and emotions that people typically are navigating at this time of year.
Right. I think all of us live life with a sense of a past, a present, and an anticipated future. And I think the seasons of life and the calendar as such gives us those milestone moments where we can kind of stand back and reflect on the year that was. And as you say, do an audit, do that reflection on what we have achieved, as people are goal-oriented, you know, purposeful living, to say there are certain things that we strive for, and the year gives us a time within which we can set milestones and goals for ourselves. And as we reach the end of the year, it's time to look back and kind of do that, you know, audit, that tick box that says, how far off the mark have I been? Have I been spot on, or even hopefully exceeded that mark? But the reality of life is that life is never just a straight line. So we will encounter setbacks and potholes along the way, and those will determine where we are by the end of the year in relation to what we had anticipated we would achieve. And so not everything will necessarily be ticked off the list, and it is about that proportion between what you have achieved or not, but also being realistic about the circumstances and dynamics that you would have needed to navigate that have, you know, put you at the point where you are as the year ends.
Khosi, and thanks for that, and also giving us a way to think about how we measure success in a different way. It's not about static goals, because we're not machines, we're not automatons, and there is organic nature to how things develop, and so we can't be measuring things in just a scientific or a linear way.
Absolutely.
I think what's really important, though, Khosi, in this conversation is to remind ourselves of the context that we find ourselves in. South Africa does have an issue around underlying mental health. We have a dearth of services that are available to people to go and talk about their feelings, to be able to just excavate and externalize some of the things that we're dealing with internally. How does the existing state of being and state of mind of the nation contribute to us having an exponentially worse time at this time of the year?
Yeah. True to your word, we don't live in isolation. You know, there is the personal self, but there's also an inalienable social self that talks to the social context within which we exist, which also invariably is political and is economic. And all of those, that confluence of all of that does, you know, reverberate on the personal self. And we will find ourselves at different places. And we as individuals also, as a starting point, have our own internal resources, and therefore will cope differently based on those internal resources, even with a social, a generalized experience that everybody is experiencing in at any given time. So, for example, there was COVID that everybody was facing, but all of us coped differently with that because of a number of internal and social, psychosocial dynamics that are available. And therefore, as the year draws to an end, we will find ourselves at different stages and in different states of self and psychological well-being at this time. And it's very important to, in anticipation of what happens specifically around the festive bottleneck, so to speak, because clearly not everything is festive about the festive season, right? And we need to do that stock take for everyone of us needs to do that for ourselves and say, where am I finding myself? Do a check-in, do that stock take and say, where am I finding myself at this time? What do I need? What form of support do I need? And where can I draw that support from? And as you say, from the services that are available from a government level, for example, their need always outstrips the available resources, even in your private sector. And so it is important that we not only look for ourselves or look at ourselves and rely solely on ourselves, because there are sometimes our circumstances are way beyond those resources. And it is to check for ourselves, who can we tap into? Where else? What is the social network or social capital that we can build for ourselves? Phone a friend, and then you can escalate that depending on the severity of the issues.
We also make the assumption, Dr. Jiyane, that when we think about depression, when we think about the festive season blues, it's only happening to people who are isolated, who are alone, who may not have a great social network, who may not really have friends or even interests that they can engage in. It can also happen when you're with your family. And again, there's so much pressure. We were having a discussion about finances the other day in the studio and how much expectation there is on families for you to provide, especially if you live in, Egoli, or if you're going home and so on. How do you manage loneliness in a crowd?
I think it's very important for us to have a proactive approach to our lives and to the expectations of people. So yes, of course, there is an unspoken script that says when you are a goalie, invariably it means you are in the pocket of gold, and you have these unlimited resources, which is unrealistic, right? And not true in most, if not all instances. And so it is important to have ongoing conversations with family so that by the time you make that trip, as you were saying, you head to the N3 to make that trip home, that you will have communicated with your family around where you are finding yourself. I think we need to be proactive about being part of, that we are part of and not victims of what's going to happen and these expectations that are going to happen. We live in an era of technology where we can have these meetings, WhatsApp meetings, either video or voice, where we can bring people to the table, so to speak, and discuss these things up front so that you don't find yourself at the tail end being reactive when there's an opportunity to be proactive about where you are finding yourself, what you will be bringing, so that everybody adjusts their expectations and plans for the Christmas around the reality of the resources that are available.
What about unexpected paradigm shifts, Khosi? I know personally friends and family who are having to endure, and I say endure this festive season because it is a period of suffering for them, with somebody who might have passed away, in an untimely fashion, first Christmas or New Year without that person, or somebody whose relationship has ended and it's the first Christmas or New Year without that particular person. Managing, real grief, how do you do that? And just to add, sometimes you have to do it and take care of your children. So you want to also give them a happy time, but you also want them to be real, that there is loss, and allow them a space where they can also be sad.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit it on the nail about being real. Grief is the price we pay for having loved someone who passes on. And we need to embrace that it is part of the journey. And it is part of having lived with this person and of cherishing the moments that we have had with them. And therefore, in their absence, we will feel the pain of them not being with us. And it is about, again, being proactive about what do we want to do in honor of them not being here with us. And, you may have an individual ritual that you want to do, or as a family, in this case, as you cited, there may be children. So this may be a father, a mother that they have lost. And it is about the family coming together and having a conversation and saying, how do we want to honor their absence? And it may be we want to keep a chair for them at the table we want to buy a flower or something, and it doesn't have to be anything big, but it's important to talk about it, because it is the silence that kills more than talking about issues, even as it is uncomfortable. The comfort comes through talking, not by avoiding it.
Oh, I'm just writing down that sentence that you just shared with us, that grief is the price we pay for having loved. It really is a powerful sentence. Thank you, Khosi, for stopping by our studio today. I really appreciate some of what you've shared, and I hope that for our viewers, for those of you who are feeling alone or lonely, that this might have helped you just a little bit. A clinical psychologist, Dr. Khosi Jiyane, just sharing with us how to deal with the festive season blues.